really thank you for joining us today as we do book 16 on stellar healing. Now, this is the perfect preference, if you will, to go then and look at those medical astrology tapes. Once you review this course and study this, you then can go into Paul's class and have that basic foundation to be able to really get the most benefit out of what he's talking about. Having heard him lecture before, what he talks about is the next level of this foundation material. And you will gain tremendous insight in terms of just how much control and influence we have over our own health and healing. And I guess that's kind of one of the introductions of how this works. When we look at all of these books, especially starting now with book 16 until we get to the end of the series, there are 4 basic concepts that you really want to focus on. And each of these are actually included in our opening and closing ceremony. And you can classify those into really 4 attributes: to know, to will, to dare, to be silent. To know really means not only gaining knowledge, but application of knowledge. Knowledge without experience does not produce wisdom. We need to personally experience, and Zane was very emphatic that everyone needs to validate the information contained with these books in their own life and practice. So to gain the knowledge, honestly, is not enough. Application of the knowledge is really called for. And as we transition out of book 16 until we get to book 21, you're going to see a greater emphasis on the practical aspects of application. Now, the second of that is to will. What do you want to gain from this material in these books? What are the goals that you have set, if you've set any, in terms of how you will be of service? You have to know what you want in order to make the most out of what you gain and what you will get. You can just wander aimlessly and just whatever happens, happens. But part of this series is really directed at having active thought, having thoughts that are driven for specific purposes. And part of that, one of those purposes, is to know, what are we driving to? Are we driving to protect, if you will, perfect ourselves? Are we driving to be a better service to the brothers and sisters? Are we to be a better father, mother, brother, sister, husband, wife? What are the roles? What are you going to use this knowledge for, and how will you apply it? And then there's a challenge. Do you dare do this? And are you really taking the risks in your practice that allow you to fully exercise the experience and knowledge that you're gaining? So many people, and I've been guilty of this as well, that you will gain a piece of information, but even if you do partially apply it, you don't take the risk to apply it to a broader audience. One of the ways that that can be done is doing both tarot and astrological readings for others, of putting yourself out there and making the effort. Will it be perfect? No, but the more you do it, the better it will become in your practice. And this is the application, but you have to put yourself at risk. And then the last edict, if you will, is to be silent. And I found this kind of interesting, and sometimes kind of not knowing quite what to think, but really it's, the more I studied and meditated upon it, the understanding is that there are appropriate times to share, and there's appropriate times to be silent and to listen. There are those who want to hear the information that we have, and there are those who do not. wisdom comes in understanding who it's best to share with and who it would be best to remain silent and just to listen and wait for the opportunity. So as I say, as we move into book 16 and then up through book 21, you're going to see these 4 attributes, these 4 constructs, if you will, become more evident. And I encourage you to add to your meditation, to your studies, asking yourselves the question of to know, to will, to dare, and to be silent or to speak at the appropriate time. And as you do these things, I think you're going to find and truly believe that you will find that the opportunities will become more evident for you. All right. If you have questions on this, we'll talk about those at the end because we'll have some time to do it. Chapter 1 on stellar anatomy, serial lesson 197. In the front of this lesson, there is one chart, and that's on page 3, the table of aspects in their orbs. Again, I encourage you to take out your notebook, to open it up, and to add the contents of this table, because the understanding and knowing, incorporating how many degrees each aspect represents. And when you're looking at a conjunction, 0 degrees aspects, if it's a succeeding house, it's 10 degrees. If it is an angular house, it's 12. Just knowing this information of the significance that each of these aspects represent. And when you're looking at a chart, it will really help you in terms of the accuracy. Also, there are 3 things that you need to bear in mind. The composition of the astral body is all based upon the drive for significance, reproduction, and nutritive. Those 3 elements are like with our physical body. We have the need for nutrition, and you have the need to also nurture the astral body. But these drives are a little different in making sure that within your practice and with the definition that is within and incorporated mostly within book 5, that you start to make sure that you're doing those things to build your astral body and to make it more powerful. Now, remember that the astral body can and does operate independent from the physical. Many people are under the mistaken impression that the astral body and the physical body run parallel in terms of the development. And that's really not true. They do not. You will find that there are those who emphasize their astral body to the detriment of their physical body, which is not recommended, or their physical to the detriment of the astral body, which is equally not recommended. They should run somewhat in parallel, but you'll find at times in situations that one will have emphasis over the other. But over a period of time, you want to make sure that you're doing practices, you're taking care of yourself, and you're taking care of both that astral body and the physical body. A lot of that information is contained within book 5. There's highlights given within chapter 1 in this lesson. There's also the 12 compartments of the astral body, which are explained a little later in this book, but are summarized in book 1, serial lesson 42, page 112. And they're all based on thoughts, feelings, and impulses. And that's important to remember. Now, you also want to note in the birth chart, the position of each planet, and consider the electromagnetic signals. The more perfect the aspect, referring back to that table, the stronger the effect. Also, there's a huge impact with the ascendant and the midheaven. The ascendant is a point of grounding, the midheaven is a point of amplification. So any planet, any aspect that incorporates the areas around the midheaven, you're going to find will have more significance than with other parts of the birth chart. Now, this is also a suggestion that if you do not have the computer program for doing and preparing charts that the Church of Light has sponsored, I really strongly recommend that you do this. Now, within this book, it shows you how to manually calculate those things, which in the 1960s and 70s and before, that had to be done. And the time involved is significant. Also, the possibility that you're going to do it incorrectly and make mistakes increases. And unfortunately, when you make a mistake early on, it carries through in the results. So get the computer program. You still need to understand kind of how they're calculated and the importance of those things, but the computer program will save you lots of pain, lots of suffering, and it will help in terms of a better understanding. And that is especially true when we talk about Astrodynes. Now, what are Astrodynes? The Astrodynes really are about the power and the significance of a planet, an aspect, or a sign. Everything is not equally powerful. Everything is not equally impactful. And Zane was one of the few. Astrodynes have been around for a long time, but Zane was one of the few to heavily incorporate these into the calculations and use the Astrodynes, both positive and negative, to determine the positive effects and the negative effects, and to be able to prioritize what you're looking at. There may be a terrible aspect, but if it has very little power, it's going to have such a minimal impact that it may not even be noticeable. But unless you know how much power these carry, you don't understand then, and you may misinterpret the impact of that sign, planet, or house that they're represented within. Again, the computer program does all this for you automatically and helps you to be able to better understand these things and how to best interpret and use them. Now, chapter 2 begins looking at diagnosis of illness. And I really have to caution you here, unless you are a medical professional, you cannot legally diagnose, treat, or cure any disease. Otherwise, you will be sanctioned, or they will come after you for practicing medicine without a license. What this material is ideally used for is for recognition within yourself, within your family, or for those people you may talk to, areas to discuss with their medical professional. In other words, if you start seeing symptomology, or that you're symptomatic of some disease or illness, and you find that these aspects that are represented within the following chapters are significant in your chart, be either the birth chart or the progress chart, this gives you the opportunity to have a more detailed discussion with your medical professional, and the ability to, if you will, have an active volition to be able to intervene with intentional thinking, critical thinking, and take a positive view and use spiritual and mental alchemy to mitigate on a spiritual level the significance of those illnesses. Now, you may find a lot of similarity, or wondering if there are other groups out there that use critical thinking, positive thinking, mental interventions as a cure for illness. And what they're doing is based in fact, but it has to be balanced with the conditions that the body face. Is it enough to do the mental processes alone? You have to come to your own decision of that. I believe it needs to be balanced with what can be done by a medical professional, and then you do your part to help fix and contribute. May that be enough on your own? I don't know. I like to work in tandem and utilize what science has given us. Now, there are PDFs available of some books we're going to talk about here. These are available from the Church of Light, which are a more detailed list and understanding of various diseases and their stellar treatment. The Book of Disease and Stellar Treatment is a PDF on the Church of Light website that you can purchase. And it is one of those that I will make a reference to and that I refer to on a regular basis to make sure I'm doing everything I can, and more importantly, making sure I'm not doing things that inhibit or, if you will, cancel out some of the medical treatments that are being done. Also, the natal chart will help, as well as the progress chart. You have the information to defend yourself against illness and disease using that directed thinking. And note the use of rallying forces on page 31. Rallying forces are now going to become a theme in the books as we progress. And being able to make use of that directed thinking, that extra effort, that particular approach to mental and spiritual alchemy will pay you tremendous dividends. And I encourage you to take a look at it. Yes, and as Vega pointed out, the body disease and stellar treatments is under About Benjamin book on light.org, and you can obtain that there. Page 31, the stellar diagnosis, 5 points in commentary. Let's take a look at that real quick, if you happen to have that open. This is a part of this chapter that you should take a very strong look at and make sure that you understand the impact of the sun and the moon in terms of positive and negative magnetic effect, and the various planetary energies that are purposed. Also, look at, as talked about on page 35, the use and using a computer program to talk about dual rulerships, which is a concept that we've never really talked about before. There's another book that's available in PDF, the book of when and what events will happen and how to select a vocation. Both of these are related to this whole way of directed thinking and to understand the impact and interpretation of both the birth chart and of the progress chart. So use the program, use the reference materials that are made available along with what's given here in the book. In chapter 3, with the principles of stellar healing, serial lesson 199, page 49, there are some specific thought treatment processes to follow. And I strongly recommend that you focus on this and transcribe this into your notebook. All too often, we read this and then we kind of forget about it. There are 4 points that are made in terms of the process. Point number 1 is not only disease of the physical body, but all the ills which beset human life can successfully be treated by the methods of stellar healing. Point number 2, in such treatment, it is to prove successful, the desires of the thought cells must be changed so that they will desire and therefore work for the things that which the individual also desires, the directed thinking. Point number 3, the thought cell desiring the things which the individual also desires must possess or be given enough energy that their extra physical power is significant to bring about change in the physical body or to the physical environment necessary to complete the healing. And point number 4, the greater the facilities afforded the thought cells by the physical environment, the less extra physical power will be needed to complete the healing. One of the things that I think these 4 processes really identify is that there is a very strong need for the ability to think clearly and to focus. The more our practice develops in our ability to concentrate and to focus our attention, the more successful that we will be in terms of these practices and the applications of this treatment process. This does not come overnight. The ability to concentrate, to be able to cause change by directed thinking or bring about change by directed thinking is something that often people think is magical, but really what it is no more than or no less than the ability to intensify our focus to the point that our thoughts become the reality. Now, on page 52 to 55, again, update your notebook to look at rulership and planetary rulerships. This information, again, is something that you want to be able to reference. And it's interesting on 55 through 58, I don't know why I came up with the skull, but it talks about chiropractic reference, the ability to apply these treatments and the ability to utilize other professionals the same way, where using the points of entry on the spine can bring significance in terms of how different illnesses and states of being are facilitated. And that leads into the idea on page 70 of the laying on of hands. There are 3 conditions listed on 71 and 72 for the laying on of hands. Number 1 is the electromagnetic energy of the healer, which passes from his hands to the patient. Point number 2, his astral vibrations of a planets, which the healer is on, and which passes from his hands with the electromagnetic energy to the thought cells of the patient. And number 3, the thoughts and mental images in the healer's mind, which direct the electromagnetic energy and the planetary energy to the accomplishment of a specific healing job to be done. To really simplify that, what it is if for those people, particularly those who practice in this way, being able for them to visualize the person being whole, being complete, being well, is a vital part of this. The healer, the person who's really facilitating the healing, has to believe it, has to be able to visualize it in such strength that the person's body is impacted by that. There's also the 3 conditions on that I just talked about on 71, 72, and the use of color and sound on page 75 through 80. This also relates to why music can have such a calming and healing or an upsetting effect. There are sciences exploring right now, in medical science in particular, how various sounds impact people. There's something called binaural vibrations, which have been studied as particularly in the treatment of addictive behaviors that I was involved in 10 years ago, that have shown great impact. And what that is certain tones and certain frequencies, when they resonate within the individual, the person's brain actually imitates those same sounds and brings about physical changes within the brain and consequent changes in behaviors. So there's so much that we have to learn about the use of colors and sounds that, again, can have a tremendous healing effect and impact. We know certain colors can make people hungry. Certain colors can agitate. Certain colors can calm. And the more that we understand these things and make use of them, the more that we will see success in the practice that is left. Now, in chapter 5, there are steps starting on page 90 for the diagnosis, selecting healing thoughts, educating the patient in general health treatment. And again, the way that this is used is really to make sure that you're working in combination with a licensed medical professional. What you're showing is the astrological considerations, the forces and the impact from the external that is effective, the internal. And if you follow this starting on page 90, you'll see that there is a logical process to participate in and how that this can bring about significant change. In chapter 6, serial lesson 202, let's turn to page 112 in the book. There are 3 steps that are represented. First step is the desires of the thought cells are chiefly responsible for disease must be favorably changed. So you have to be able to identify what you're dealing with and look using spiritual alchemy, directed thinking, and mental alchemy to impact change in that individual. Number 2, the diseases of the thought cells of the zone where the disease manifests must be favorably changed. So it's not just the mind, but it is also the body. And then number 3, the desires of the thought shells of the house, constants of the difficulty should be given harmonious strength. So look at what house, look at the ruler, and this is particularly impactful in the 6th and the 10th house. So look at what's occurring within the 6th and the 10th house, and to, again, bring about things that will help impact and bring meaningful change. The computer program, again, can help you to do this, even though that you can manually calculate, though it's quite cumbersome. Note 5 steps on understanding medical issues on page 133. Use information as a basis for working with your medical professional. Those 5 steps are very keenly outlined and something that, again, you can bring to the practice. The number 1 is the layman who is capable of erecting and progressing his own chart, as an increasing number of people are, will know the astrological constant toward the disease he has a predisposition, when they are most apt to develop, and what precautionary actions he or she should take. Note that this information can be not necessarily preventive, but that you can intervene even prior of the occurrence. Number 2, the birth chart and progressed constants thus shown will indicate, as given in chapter 5, serial lesson 201, the healing thoughts that he or she should apply to themselves or to the people they're working with. Number 3, by studying the course 3, spiritual alchemy, 5, esoteric psychology, book 9, mental alchemy, and 14, occultism applied, he or she will know how, in what direction to change their attitude and thinking to the advantage. Number 4, he or she can talk to such of his organs and functions as not doing their work properly. We sometimes forget that we have the ability to address even down to our DNA level, and that by addressing the specific areas that we can bring about meaningful change. And number 5, he or she can apply the indicated planetary energy to the region, such special stellar arrangement by tuning in on it as explained in chapter 4, and directing to the proper zone by holding the region steadfastly in his or her attention. Again, being able to concentrate comes with practice. All of these things are developed through a practice and repeating practice till such time that you become more and more effective. From here on, we look at individual types of illnesses and issues. For instance, in this chapter, starting on page 134, these are in alphabetical order. Through 145, we see beginning with abdominal troubles, and 145 in this chapter brings it through issues of bleeding. As we progress through 8 through 12, again, these are all in alphabetical order. There are a couple of special rules given on page 151 that should be taken of note and written in your notebook. Rule number 1, each major progressed constant constant of an event or disease is always reinforced by a minor progressed aspect heavier than from the moon to one of its four terminals at a time the event occurs and the disease develops. And rule number 2, each reinforced major progressed constant of an event or disease is always released by a transit aspect heavier. So this is one time that both the minor progressed and transients are brought into play. Before, we haven't given very much attention to those. The illustration that's always been given to me is that the transit is like someone with a match ready to light the fuse. The minor progresses the fuse. The major progressed is actually the blasting cap, and then the natal chart is the explosive itself. All of those have to be in alignment when we're dealing with medical issues. And you'll find that there are other specifics. If you take Paul's class, that again is listed on YouTube and on light.org, you will see that he will go into far more detail in the specifics of other aspects and how to interpret those. Now, note again those specific conditions starting on page 154 to 253. Knowing and using this book can help you reduce and in some cases eliminate these diseases from occurring within yourself and within your family and your friends. Is it 100%? You know, it's more of a factor of how good is your concentration, and also working with a medical professional that you can talk to and be able to share information with. Again, if we go back to those rules that I shared at first, you may not want to share the source of the information you have, but also to talk about maybe some specific areas or specific concerns that you have so that they have the broadest base information to work from. That's really the material. The application of this material is where you gain the knowledge, you gain and be able to incorporate and build wisdom. It's not something that you can just read, put away, and never refer to again. This is meant to be actively used. Course 16, I think, is one book that you will make use of as much or more than any others that are in here. In terms of the last COVID pandemic, I have known people that have looked at, and if you look at pulmonary illnesses and some of these others, there's many ways that you can aid in your treatment and recovery, along with working with your medical professional to help minimize the impact of things like COVID and others. Can it cure it? I don't know. With that alone, I know that it can minimize and that it can have an impact on it and how you feel about it. And that's probably the most important thing. We have an ability to take an active role in our health. The more that we take advantage of this, the more that we will improve our life and the lives of others. All right, with that, let's go ahead and do the closing ceremony, and then we will go to our question and answers. Vega, would you like to go ahead and lead in the closing ceremony?